cameras now. There we go.
Just give me a couple of seconds and we are going live.
Okay.
Okay.
Finally, ladies and gentlemen, we are online on our digital week, and go ahead. Xenia, your turn.
We're waiting for a couple participants because our panel is about the role of regulations in the blockchain adoption, but we have a couple more people and I don't see him here right now.
Okay, perfect. You know, we can just try to introduce yourselves. For example, Matthew can introduce about yourselves, Xenia, because we have to wait each other and it will be good, yes, to introduce first and waiting for the people if you don't mind.
Of course. So I can just tell a couple of words about the topic we will be discussing while we are waiting for other people. So the role of regulations in the mass adoption of blockchain technology. It is a really relevant topic, especially with all the regulatory updates we're seeing in the space right now. So for example, there is a lot of misinformation about the Fed of travel rule. There are definitions about what a virtual asset service provider actually is. There are multiple updates and regulatory enforcements with cases as huge as Telegram that we are seeing right now. And these are the issues that make it that make the players in the space, it's relevant for both fintech platforms and for the players in the blockchain space. So it's really interesting to try to understand, are the regulations that are being enforced right now are actually stopping blockchain technology from adoption, or is it actually helping? And because like when in the ICO days, there was this wild west, and while a lot of protests actually were like succeeded mostly because they thought they don't have to follow any rules, any regulatory rules. So yeah, this is the topic we will be discussing today. My name is Xenia Viazemskaya. I'm the co-host of Value Tokenized, a podcast about tokenized assets in the future of finance, and founder of It Takes Two. Yeah, so this is briefly about myself. Matt, would you like to say a couple words?
Yes, it will be great, Matt. Introduce yourself and tell us what do you do in this blockchain industry.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you. It's really exciting to be here. I think so I'm the CEO and founder of iComply. We are a compliance technology company. Essentially, think of it as back in the early days of the internet of communications, we still had things like bitcode translators and things like this, and it's very similar that you can build out regulatory rule sets jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And that's a lot of our focus, from things like digital identity and how data is managed, privacy, to securities regulation for things like digital assets, digital securities. As Xenia mentioned, the FATF travel rule is definitely something that we see happening a lot in the digital assets space, the cryptocurrency space. But I think it's very interesting as a means of blockchain technology being able to be used by the mainstream financial services, where 99% of the money is actually held, and having the ability for that technology to be held in your wallet if you have a bank account is, I think, where we see a lot of changing trends in financial services, because public blockchains can finally start being used in mainstream financial applications.
Yeah, for sure. I see. Yes, Xenia, your word.
No, I was just going to say thank you, Matthew, and that I see Mariella here, Mariella Tanchez of Bitfolix, who are joining us today on this panel. Hi, Mariella.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Mariella, we have bad sound. Yes, just try to be closer to the computer.
Okay, sure. Sounds good. Thank you for having me.
It's not good. It's not good. Try to once more time.
Okay, like this?
No.
No? Okay, hold on.
Maybe.
Probably your dynamic is blocked. Yeah, the speaker is blocked.
No, I have it all. Can you hear me? No?
Yes, we
We
hear.
can hear. It's a little bit muted, but I think that should be fine. So Mariella, would you like to say a couple of words about yourself and Bitfolix? I was just telling the basics, but what we're discussing here today is the role of regulations in the mass adoption of blockchain technology. Yeah, please tell us a couple of words about yourself.
Sure, thank you. So I'm the marketing director and commercial director for Bitfolix, which is an online cryptocurrency platform and wallet. We're developing into becoming a whole fintech product where we incorporate everything that a person needs for financial inclusion with blockchain and fiat money. So basically, we noticed that there was a mass market of people trying to utilize crypto in order to do their everyday transactions, but they don't know how to use it. Things are complicated and everything. And so we develop a very easy to use platform so they can engage in it. And we're developing into where they can have every single aspect. You know, they can pay services, they can have an exchange, they can have in a wallet, and have everything in a single platform. And definitely with regulation, we are in the midst of having all of that. So we're definitely feeling the pressure, especially because one of our biggest markets, for example, is Mexico, and they just approved a regulation, a law. The Congress is already moving forward with that. And so therefore we're really in the middle of that, trying to figure out how to make sure that we do not get stopped because of regulation, because regulation is always a good thing, but you need to know how to work it to make sure it works for you and it doesn't stop your product development. So yeah, that's basically a little summary about us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. While we are still waiting for 2 more people to join us, I would like to ask to start maybe with the higher like bird view of this topic. And I'm a subscriber of RegWatch. It's a newsletter that Matthew's company, I Comply, is doing on a monthly basis to cover the most important updates in the space. So Matt, maybe you can start by telling us, what do you see as the massive trends? What are the most important trends to watch in this space right now? And which one of them are actually helping adoption and which trends are stopping it?
Interesting. Digital securities, I think, is an area that you're seeing a lot of stuff on 2 fronts. What we just saw happening with Telegram and how all of that's unfolding. What happened with Airfox and Paragon, they're setting precedent in the US market, but that's, regulators around the world are looking to see what happens in the US as well. Around the world, a lot of communications for offerings is where you see a lot of regulators, targeting people that have made promises or are making offerings in jurisdictions where they didn't maybe file, a report of distribution like a Reg D in the US. And so those are some of the things that are happening on a weekly basis now by regulators around the world. But I think the FAT of travel rule from an adoption perspective maybe has the largest impact because there's been so many questions around financial institutions. Can I buy this Bitcoin? What's the source of this Bitcoin? Or who is custodying these funds? If I, holding this Bitcoin, if my client doesn't want to see a private code because they don't manage their other money, they pay someone to do it. And so, if they don't, who's holding this and has ultimate, do you want your broker to have the ability to transfer all of your assets into their own wallet with nobody ever knowing before it's done? And so that's where a question really comes in of how do we build in a little more governance and maturity. And I think regulation is a big step. Like Mariella was saying, it's a big step towards that because as the regulators set these standards, there's a rule book. And the cool thing about fintech is that we're programming the rule books. So it's a huge step forward if we can offer new open source services that are travel rule compliant. If wallets just update to this standard, all of a sudden the whole industry can reach a new type of investor.
Yeah, and I think it's. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, that you also, as user and as developer, as commercial developer, you get engaged with the regulators because if I've seen that a lot of regulation is coming from people that don't really understand the business or don't really use it, and therefore it's not applicable, and it might be more of a roadblock. So if you start getting engaged, if we get that movement from all the people, for example, we've tried to get really engaged in all the conversations that are happening in governments all around the world. We're trying to get to know the regulators, trying to talk to them to make sure that they don't close the blockchain space, because it's a really thin line regulating and actually controlling. And at the end of the day with blockchain, you want to lose control, right? You want decentralization. So I think it's very important that people engage, both as users trying to figure out what their regulators are doing, and us as fintechs really being part of this discussion and not letting it just happen. Because if we do that, it's just going to go south.
Definitely. Thank you so much. I was just going to say that Tumelo Ramaphosa of CDEX, another panelist of our discussion today, has just joined us. Tumelo, can you hear us?
Yes,
we
yes,
can hear
I can.
you. We can see you.
Hi there.
We don't see you, but we can hear you well.
Hi, how are you?
Yes.
Hi there, guys. How's it going?
Perfect. Yeah. Now we can see you. Thank you for joining us today. We just started to introduce ourselves and basically outline the topic we're discussing today, which is the role of regulations, the main regulatory updates in the role, like their role and the mass adoption of blockchain technology. Can you please introduce yourself and your company? Tell us more about CDEX and your outlook on this question.
Okay, please, can you, the last part of the question again?
Just start with introducing yourself and then we'll dive into the topic.
Okay, my name is Tumelo Ramaphosa. I'm the CEO and founder of Statix Wildlife, which is a rare and endangered species investment platform on the blockchain, where we help farmers and veterinary scientists to advance their work through a new digital economy for profits that we are building and working with different partners. So we are based in both Africa and San Francisco, United States. The reason we got into blockchain was primarily because of the because of the wide scale adoption in 2016, when we founded the company. And that was a very big time within the space in blockchain. We were following the methods of an initial coin offering, of which in 2018 we went to World Cryptocurrency Economic Forum and then participated as one of the top 20 initial coin offering startups. Right now we are developing our platform ready to release later this year, and we are also one of the team members on the Bitcoin bill, on the crypto bill, and the blockchain bill in the United States with Eric Finman, as well as the founder and CEO of Mental Pay. And we are being led by Governor Paul Gosar and 20 other governors on the bill. And we're currently right now in our third hearing right now. So the reason I did this was because we had more opportunity in the United States in terms of regulation, in terms of the appetite that regulators had, and also in terms of the things that were happening within the space. The regulators were less apprehensive and more open to the ideas of a cryptocurrency backed by either endangered wildlife, but primarily to legalize Bitcoin as a currency, but also to legalize blockchain, to mitigate the tax and the costs as well, to manage it as a capital gains tax as you would an asset. So to remove the double tax that we are right now seeing. So the Department of Finance as well as Economic Development were also part of this bill in the United States.
Thank you very much for this introduction. My next question is for Matthew. So there are different kinds of fintech and blockchain projects, even if you take a look with primary issuance or secondary market, but there are also a lot of directions where projects are developing, because probably what StatX is doing is very different. Of course, it's very different from what Bitfolix is focused on. So in your opinion, some of the regulations that you're seeing like appear or being updated right now, which are more relevant for the type of projects that are more like traditional, like crypto exchanges? Is there something that won't impact more specific lines of business within the blockchain space?
Yeah, there's definitely a couple of updates that are very targeted towards the use of cryptocurrency or virtual assets, as the regulators are often calling it. In Singapore, they have the DPT, and they're changing to the money services businesses. It's kind of being it's very complex, and not all of the things are covered. Some of the legislation says there needs to be custody, but then doesn't really spell out how that has to be done. So it's created friction in the market. The market can't move forward without this clarity. It's the law says there has to be clarity, but it hasn't. The guidance isn't out yet. In the UK, they did January 8th or 10th. The new regulation came into effect for players dealing with virtual assets, and several of our clients were able to be the first ones live with these types of with this new type of regulatory license. In the US, I think we're going to see a lot more stuff related to virtual assets as money services businesses, and I think in general, Luxembourg, Germany are kind of heading that same way as the UK. Which the UK structure is much simpler. It's the same as in Canada. It's a much simpler structure, so you can kind of serve a jurisdiction with one license, whereas in the US, Coinbase, I believe, has 24 different money services and money transmitter licenses just to operate in about 27 states or so. So it's a very complex regime in the US.
Mariella, can you probably try to cover the same question, but from the perspective in your line of business? What are the regulations where some specific enforcements that you think affect you the most? And some of the bigger cases, for example, Telegram, do you see them affecting only some specific players who now have less trust from governments, regulators, etc.? Or there are type of players that won't be affected by this major cases at all?
I think everyone will be affected. This is definitely something that's historically going on. Technology moves forward faster than regulation, definitely. So that's why I mentioned before, you need to be prepared and you need to be one step ahead. For example, at Bitfolix, we're keeping up with every regulation in the whole world. We have our legal team working nonstop so that we're prepared. And whenever we hear they start doing those regulations, we start making the necessary adjustments, whether it's in a platform, whether it's in our KYC and all of that. And we are taking that step ahead to make sure that when regulation kicks in, it's not going to kick in against us, but it's going to kick in our favor. And also, like I said, being involved, talking to people, making sure that you talk to regulators. Some things might make sense for them, but once you talk them into how the technology works or how the customer actually needs it, they're going to change their mind. So you need to be really involved in that. And right now, for example, we're overseeing our whole KYC process. And I believe that's a big challenge. That has been a really big challenge for us because people are used to being anonymous in the blockchain world. And now you're asking them to pretty much go through the same process that they have to go to banks, which was previously a benefit of blockchain. You don't have to share your whole information, and now we're forced to being asked for certain transactions. And so you also have to educate people in the sense that just because they're sharing their information doesn't mean that it's going to be government control. Make sure that you also share with your clients, share with people. The fact that you're sharing your information for me for regulatory processes doesn't mean that I'm going to control you or use it against you. And blockchain has that good thing that everything is safer in the way we interact with documents and all that. So that's definitely a strength that people should definitely take on. But like I said, we cannot stop and wait to see what regulators have to offer for us. We have to be the ones that offer the regulators the basis so they can work on, because eventually they're all going to start working, but it's going to be complicated at time. I know, for example, in Italy, the concept, which is a regulatory place there, started closing a lot of websites because they thought they weren't keeping up with regulation. And then all of these websites are appealing because they have done nothing against, there's no law against them or anything. And so they're appealing at the moment. But the fact that the government just came in and say, hey, we think you're doing something wrong, so we're going to close you. So you need to be one step ahead to make sure that you can manage those situations. And I think that's the most important thing right now, making sure you're doing things right, but knowing what is right according to the place that you're working in.
Thank you, Mariella.
It's also, I think it's interesting. I would somewhat maybe disagree with something you said earlier, Marielle, around regulation is always a good thing. I think there's previously to working in tech, I worked as a broker, and in running my own practice, there's a huge amount of leeway for regulators to come in, and there's always a pushback. And I think this is something that in the blockchain world, because we weren't, when the industry first started, KYC doesn't apply to me because I'm crypto to crypto only. This is something that a lot of players would say, and so a lot of the new guidance that's coming out, there's times where the regulator or the authority, the tax authority in the case of one of the other examples that was given, you have to end up taking them to essentially in Canada or the US, the Supreme Court, to actually get through that. So there's a pick your battles game in regulation that I think a lot of people don't understand. It's a business decision. And there's also, I think, a little bit of a false dichotomy around this concept of privacy versus like banking secrecy and AML compliance. I think there's the ability, using this technology that we are saying, it's not just about trading the value of Bitcoin up and down. This technology has a lot of use cases. The ability to manage KYC and KYC across jurisdictions. How you collect identity, where it's processed, where it's stored, changes by jurisdiction. Not to mention, what you have to collect, how you collect it, and what information you log. And so, this was a huge thing when we launched our KYC product. Was we, just in our working with compliance for digital securities, AML has its own lenses that change by jurisdiction. Digital identity is not even accepted in some jurisdictions, and so how to create something that's nimble and you can plug in and continue to update without having to overhaul your technology stack all the time is a big area where we work with a lot of players who need to serve across borders. But one of the things that I'm always, even with a system that's plug and play like ours, I'm always kind of surprised with some players with cryptocurrency is that they're still in this concept that I get a license in Lithuania or Estonia, and I'm going to service the entire world with my platform. And I think we can look at PayPal as an early player in this space to understand it's actually really complex. And PayPal is, I think, licensed in 84 countries, not 200 and something. But yeah, that's just maybe a bit of a counterpoint to. I think there's a regulation is not always a good thing, and in that we sometimes it needs to be innovated as well, and that people can go too far with regulation to the point where we're not actually achieving our mandate. And I would say a good example would be applying the current US 1934 securities law towards digital assets is maybe one example that we could probably innovate in that area and accomplish a lot.
Yeah.
I have a question for Mariella. I think it's related to what you have just said, Matthew, but Mariella, you are on the marketing side of the business, and there is a lot of questions that are connected to how do you actually market your product? How are you telling the users about the investment opportunities? How are you telling the users about the role of your token? There are multiple layers related to regulations, specifically around this topic. Can you share a couple of basic points? How are you actually handling this within Bitfoliex, and what are the main things that anyone who markets to users in the US, in Europe, in Asia, what people need to know?
Yeah, so definitely, I think one of the main things, the first thing is always be educated. Even though we're not legal department, we're not compliance department, we always need to be educated to make sure we're using the right words. And I always have very constant communication with our legal department to make sure that we're utilizing the right words. And then obviously we get into the marketing techniques and sales techniques, but I think one of the main reasons, the main points is making sure your client understands. Like I said, we have a pretty big user base. We grew very fast. We have over 1 million users in our platform. We're barely being 1 year up and running. And so we have them spread across the world. So it's important that you understand, like Matthew said, that different regulations are going to be in different countries. So as marketing, you also need to understand your markets and what they're going through in their countries to make sure you know how to communicate with them. So once you understand what the government, what the laws are requiring for you, and then you understand how your client feels, what he's going through, because for example, there's also countries that are very, very regulated, like Venezuela, or countries that have a really bad regime. And so they also want to get away from that regime, but at the same time, we need to comply. So you need to make sure that you understand where they're coming from so you can communicate better with them, but always be educated and always have that really close relationship with your legal department and compliance department to make sure you're working things right. But at the end of the day, I think the base is education. Once people start learning about, like our users, most of them, they're really new to blockchain technology. And so once they start understanding how it works, they accept, like the KYC process right now, they're accepting the process because they know it's part of their own good. They know that if they go through the KYC process and they comply, they're not going to have troubles, and they're also going to be able to continue to use our platform. And so once you educate them, I think that's the best way to communicate with your clients and deal with all of this, making sure that you just don't impose regulation on them. Make sure you explain it to them. Why are we doing this? And then that way people understand that it is a necessary process, and they will help you out. Or maybe like sometimes, like Matthew says, sometimes it will become a roadblock where you might lose a couple of clients, but as long as you keep that good service and keep developing the product, I think you can really have that leverage where clients are willing to go through regulation just to be able to stay with you.
Those clients who users that there's drop off specifically because you have KYC?
Yes, I mean, we've had comments, and because like you said, blockchain was supposed to be a decentralized, anonymous kind of thing. And so now you're asking people for their information, and some people are not liking it, of course. I would rather not share my information with everyone. I would rather keep my information private. And that was a good thing about blockchain, but you can still keep it a little bit private. But we do have some people that, they don't like it. And unfortunately, we just have to comply. And you have to innovate too, to the point where you can offer certain things that comply without having to ask too much of that client.
Definitely, but I think there's also this, there's two different ways to kind of look at regulation, and in order to maintain, our system operates in over 200 jurisdictions. In order to maintain that, we've kind of looked at regulations as two layers. There's kind of best in class in some places in the world that you can, what FINMA in Switzerland has done with, how they do live detection, taking a human out of the process and using AI in these types of workflows saves a huge amount of money and adds the ability of like pure auditability, as well as the, low cost and having a program running these types of checks. And so you see that, and then you compare it to what we have here in Canada, where I don't even need a photo of you, and I can just, take something from your mailbox, and that should be enough to get me an online identity in a lot of places. And so, it changes by jurisdiction. And we've always looked at it like there's what is required to have a high degree of integrity and authenticity within your system. And then there's also, ticking the regulatory check boxes. So some of the things, that we do, as example, performing identity verifications client side using the processing power of the user's device. It kind of unlocks the ability for the user to prove who they are without necessarily having their data go to all sorts of different places. And when people have concerns about KYC, I completely agree. There's a lot of ICOs that I didn't take part in because I wasn't going to put my KYC information into a DocuSign PDF, and who knows where that would end up. I'm very much a privacy person personally, and there's a lot of things. Even 2011 when I first heard of Bitcoin, I thought, oh, this is identity card theft, and didn't buy in when it was at a great price. But it's one of these things where giving up this personal information is a big deal for me, and I think a lot of the users have their concerns about it come from a very valid place, that you don't know when you submit your personal information, you don't know who it's going to, and a lot of times we find the exchanges or the token issuers in the market don't even know, they haven't got statements from where is the data being processed, where is it being stored, are humans in one jurisdiction accepting data from another jurisdiction and taking a look at it. It gets really complex really quickly, and unfortunately that usually means a lot of legal fees. And I think there's a lot of startups and players in the space on the innovator side that are also frustrated because they don't have the budgets that an established platform might have to stay ahead, to even enter the market now.
Definitely. I think actually this is a wonderful closing of our today's panel, because unfortunately we are already out of time. Thank you everyone for joining us today on this panel. There are more exciting panels and keynote speakers ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Xenia. Thank you, guys. Thanks a lot. Yes, nice to meet you. Yes, maybe on another conference as well. Yes, I'm really grateful for you. And now our next speaker, Ben, is waiting for me. Ben, turn on your camera, please. Now our next keynote is with Dr. Ben Kortzel, founder of SingularityNet, and he's going to talk about future of the blockchain and artificial intelligence. Ben, stage is yours. Turn on the mic and you're in.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for inviting me. It's an honor to be here, and I've enjoyed listening in on the previous panel. I mean, there's a lot of important topics being discussed, and I think a lot of overlap with some of the things that I want to talk about here as well. So I think that the importance of intersecting AI and blockchain is becoming clearer and clearer year by year, both within the blockchain world and other parts of the world at large. I'd say it hasn't yet become a major topic in the AI community for reasons that I'll discuss. But I think the use of blockchain in enforcing decentralized control and data sovereignty and data privacy in the context of AI, which looks at people's data to draw conclusions relevant to people's lives. I mean, I think this point is getting more and more clear, and it's funny to think in late 2017, when we first started publicizing our SingularityNet project, which was founded in mid-2017, and which brings AI and blockchain together by building a marketplace for interacting, cooperating AIs that runs on the blockchain. When we first started talking about this in 2017, it was almost a weird idea. People were like, what, AI and blockchain? Are you just like throwing random buzzwords together or something? And since that time, there's been so many projects at the intersection of blockchain and AI that it's almost become an obvious idea, right? Where the core of the idea is, well, we see AI is pervading every industry. AI underlies, many judgments that are made by companies and governments and products that are affecting all of our lives. And the AI is doing its thing based on data gathered from all of us in ways that are opaque to us, right? And blockchain doesn't entirely solve that problem, but at least blockchain gives a basic tool that allows you to construct, large-scale information systems with more transparency and more decentralized participatory control, if it's used properly. I mean, blockchain can also give a way for even more efficient, centralized, and dictatorial control of AI than would be possible without blockchain, right? But I bet most powerful technological tools can be used for good or for bad. And so I think this general point has become fairly widely recognized now, and I'll go over some of the nitty-gritty details over the next few minutes. On the other hand, the reality of the situation in the world now is quite opposite from decentralization of AI, right? I mean, what's happening in the AI space now is, an oligopolization where a small number of large tech companies are hiring up more and more AI PhDs, accumulating more and more data, and I mean, creating AI models more powerful than those others are able to create because of the volumes of data that they've accumulated, and the amount of processing power and the amount of AI wizards that they've hired, right? So we're seeing a centralization of data and a centralization of processing power and a centralization of AI expertise. I mean, at the same time as we're getting better and better tools for putting AI and blockchain together and broader awareness of the value that we would have from bringing AI and blockchain together. So these general principles aren't new anymore, but getting from the general principles to the concrete reality, I mean, that involves, as always, a heck of a lot of work and often some creative improvisation along the way. So I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing in SingularityNet and in collaboration with other decentralized AI projects as well, such as Ocean Protocol and the other decentralized AI projects in our industry organization, the Decentralized AI Alliance. I want to talk about what we're doing applying AI to COVID-19, which is obviously a highly significant topic to all of us right now, since it's still massively disrupting our lives, even though various restrictions globally are starting to ease up a little bit. So in the context of what SingularityNet, Ocean Protocol, and other decentralized AI Alliance projects are doing against COVID-19, we can see very well the need for decentralization of AI, the things we can do now with decentralized AI, and then the weaknesses that still exist in the whole blockchain infrastructure as applied to AI or anything else, which are quite significant in terms of how they affect our ability to actually use decentralized AI and use blockchain-based AI in a context like COVID-19. So let me start with looking at AI and how one can use AI to cope with COVID-19 situation, and then we'll look at what role does blockchain play, or should blockchain play if the AI meets blockchain technology we're a little bit more mature, right? So one thing that we're doing now within SingularityNet, we're working with a group that's doing clinical trials of various combinational therapies. So they're taking a bunch of patients across hospitals, and they are trying combinations of different antivirals on different patients. And then we look at genomic data, like gene expression data and clinical medicine data from the patients involved in the trials. And then we try to see, well, based on the particular body of this patient, based on their genomics and other factors, like which combination of antivirals is most likely to work well for them. So this is machine learning driven precision medicine, and we can do this in some especially fancy ways, not using just ordinary machine learning, but also using machine reasoning and some logical abstraction. So in SingularityNet, like you can take one AI that does straightforward machine learning, analyzing biology data, and one AI agent that runs our OpenCog system, doing some more abstract reasoning, and they connect together, talk to each other, collaborate. So, you know, this in itself, you can do without blockchain. It's just AI. You're bringing machine learning and machine reasoning together to do precision medicine. But just to note the sort of privacy and ownership issues lurking here, like where is the data coming from that's feeding this AI? And then if something is discovered based on this, you know, who is controlling and who is profiting from that discovery, right? So that the data in the simplest case, and I'll get to more complex cases in a moment, but the data in the simplest case is coming from people in a variety of hospitals who are being treated for COVID-19 infection, right? And of course, most of these folks are happy to allow their data to be used in an investigational study. I mean, particularly if that gets them, you know, the right to use investigational therapies that may cure them better. So, I mean, it's all done with full transparency and consent of patients and so on. But, you know, they're contributing data based on their bodies. Now, with a typical clinical trial, so the person is contributing the data about their body in exchange for the opportunity to try and potentially have their life saved by an investigational therapy. On the other hand, the data from their body combined with the data from everybody else's body, this has economic value, right? And it's typically being extracted by pharmaceutical companies to then discover therapies that are sold to people. And the nature of that pipeline is not ever too clear to the clinical trial participants. And, you know, the data contributed to a trial for one pharma company typically can't be used by university researchers or other pharma companies. And I mean, you can imagine a quite different way of doing it, right? Like I'm contributing my data to help cure myself and everybody else. Why isn't the data I contribute going online into some secure medical data wallet that I control, and then I can say yes or no for that being used within different clinical trials, and then whoever wants to use it has to make a deal with me. Like it could be you just use my data for whatever you want. It could be you use my data, but give me some minute share of any profit that came from it. I mean, it could be I will only contribute my data to projects that will you know, offer therapies generically to everyone in the world. I could decide what to do with that data of mine, right? Now that's not the way it is now, but there is technology that would enable that, right? I mean, SingularityNet does open blockchain-based AI, but we have Ocean Protocols, Shivam, many projects that use the blockchain to enable, you know, secure medical data wallets. And then there's many blockchain projects working on interoperability between these blockchain medical data wallets and various hospital information management, electronic medical record systems. But these things are not widely rolled out, right? Like they're not being, there's a little bit of usage here and there, but there's not massive traction. Now, we can take the next step. We look at an additional way of getting data into AI that helps with COVID-19. So with SingularityNet's spin-off project, Rejuve.io, this project began originally to help use SingularityNet's AI on the blockchain to foster human longevity. So for example, we make an app where you put in biological information about yourself and it ingests that information from peripherals plugged into your smartphone. And then, you know, the app helps tell you what you should do to adjust your lifestyle, what supplements you should take, what you shouldn't do based on your physiology so you can live as long as possible. And this is oriented toward, you know, crazy maniacs like me who want to live for millions or billions of years rather than dying at age 80 or 100 or whatever. We want to live long enough to reach the singularity, at which point we can get nanobots in our body to refactor us and help us live forever. But of course, if you die of COVID-19, your chance of living forever goes way down. So what we've been looking at within Rejuve is sort of modifying our app ecosystem so you can connect to your smartphone a digital thermometer, a spirometer to measure breath, like a a Fitbit, which measures heart rate variability and pulse oximetry. And you can use the data from these peripherals to identify, for example, a couple of days in advance if you're getting some viral infection, like for example, COVID-19. So, you know, hypothetically, if a lot of people in the world were using apps like that and plugging in smartphone peripherals and such, you'd have an amazing amount of data that would not only give you early warning of your infection, it would teach you a lot about the spreading of the virus. And if you did get infected, all that data that your phone had ingested would help the doctors tell you which therapy should be provided to you. But then again, like who owns that data, right? I mean, if it's our project Rejuve, we're into blockchain, right? So in that case, all the data that you've contributed through Rejuve's app ecosystem will go into a secure data wallet that you control. You can kill it, you can download it, you can watch everything that's done with it. But if that's gathered in some other way, which is typical to the mainstream medical system, you're contributing data, you're getting some information about your data, which is not worthless or meaningless, but then, of course, what are they doing with your data? Well, look at like 23andMe, right? You gave them some of your data. They gave you information about your genome. You paid them. You clicked a box saying, well, okay, you can use this for research purposes. And then they sold the data to GlaxoSmithKline for a large amount of money, which you, who contributed your DNA, will see absolutely zero of, right? And so I mean that's the way the pharma business works. And it's the same thing if you're in a hospital contributing data for use in a clinical trial, or if you're at home contributing data through an app. I mean, that's your body, it's your data in a sense. But once you start putting your data into online information services, then whether it's a centralized service or like a decentralized, secure, privacy and sovereignty reflecting blockchain-based service, it makes a big difference. So that final element I want to draw in here is agent-based modeling. And we did a whole online conference of this with the Decentralized AI Alliance, the COVID Simulation Summit. And there's a bunch of projects on this in the COVID-a-thon online, like decentralized AI hackathon against COVID. You know, right now we're all living under very weird policies controlling our lives and regulating who can move where and what stores and restaurants can open, what you're allowed to do or not, which have been determined mostly in a very well-meaning way, but based on very minimal science, based on extremely simplistic epidemiological models. Now, there exist modeling and simulation paradigms that are far more sophisticated, which are not being used just due to incompetent organization on the part of the world's governments. So, I mean, agent-based modeling is sort of, think of it like SimCity on a society-wide level, where you simulate each little person moving around with their own particular characteristics, and then you simulate different policies in this like SimCity environment and see what happens. So we know how to do agent-based simulation models that work way better than the simplistic epidemiological models in use now. This technology isn't being widely deployed just due to ignorance on the part of the people making the policies. But of course, to do this sort of modeling really well, you need more and more data, right? And the more data you can feed in, the better. So of course, it's in all of our interests to feed in as much data as we can about our bodies, about our movements, about everything, so that, you know, a network representing all of our interests can figure out, well, you know, yeah, it's okay for elementary schools to open in the fall, but not to serve lunch or something. Or I mean, actually, there's no problem with allowing tourism as long as this and this and this rule are followed. So it's in all of our interest to have our collective data gathered and intelligent judgments made in a transparent and rational way. On the other hand, we totally lack the instrumentation for that, right? Like now, if you contribute meaningful data, you know, it's going somewhere. You have no idea who's going to use it for what next year, right? And I mean, you have no transparency into the decision processes that are being made. So the good news is, like, we now have the tools to do all these things. I mean, precision medicine, you know, personal health monitoring, agent-based modeling, and society-wide decision-making based on our movement and medical data. We have the infrastructure to do all this in a secure, decentralized, blockchain-based way which gives everyone transparency and participation in the process. Now, one of the bad news items is that's not what's happening now remotely, right? Instead, the COVID-19 pandemic is serving as an excuse for big tech to take over more and more of the tech economy, large banks to buy more and more of the world economy, and then governments to suck up more and more people's data and enact more and more, you know, fascist type control over the population. And part of that is not our fault in the blockchain world, but part of this is due to the fact that our underlying blockchain technologies are not yet ready for prime time. Like they're a little too slow, they're a little too awkward to use. And so my hope is that this pandemic can serve as a wake-up call in a few different ways. I mean, it should serve as a wake-up call, obviously, around the threat of global pandemics, which many people have been talking about for a long time. It should serve as a general wake-up call about the fragility of human life and health and our whole way of life, because this COVID-19 isn't even that deadly in the grand scheme of things. Like, imagine something that spread as fast as COVID-19, but had a 60% death rate, like a bird flu, or that killed children preferentially instead of elderly, right? I mean, you can imagine minor variations on what's happening now, which would be minor in terms of the underlying virology, but would cause, you know, immeasurably greater disruption and devastation on the societal level. But we should also look at this current situation as a wake-up call in terms of the acute need for decentralized AI. I mean, when there's another crisis, and I'm sure there will be, it may be a worse pandemic or maybe some different kind of crisis that we're not foreseeing right now. When there's another global crisis, will the next global crisis, you know, in 2, 3, 5, 7 years, whenever it occurs, will that serve as another excuse for, you know, encroaching ownership of the world by a small number of parties and encroaching sort of big government meets big tech to make big brother type dynamics? Or can we, in the interim, build out a scalable, decentralized AI infrastructure in a way that will allow the next global crisis to be handled in a participatory and, you know, privacy respecting way? And, you know, that's what we're working at with SingularityNet, with Rejuve, with the Decentralized AI Alliance, all the projects in there. But, you know, it's obviously an uphill battle in that our competitors are trillion-dollar companies. On the other hand, I'm old enough to remember, you know, when IBM and Wang and Honeywell were the giants in computing, and Google was a tiny little upstart, and Amazon was just selling books, right? So I mean, I think to make decentralized AI as central as it needs to be for human good and for fostering a positive singularity, it will take a complete revolution of the tech business. On the other hand, the tech business is in the habit of revolutionizing itself. And while disruptive technology has become an almost meaningless Silicon Valley buzzword, I mean, decentralized AI truly can be a disruptive family of technologies, which can make a difference in terms of whether the overall organization of the global economy is one that's broadly beneficial to all humans or just to a small number of parties, which ultimately may make the difference between whether, when we do get to a Kurzweilian technological singularity, I mean, this is a singularity which is broadly beneficial to people or not, right? So I think these are very broad points, and I hope going through them in the COVID-19 context sort of makes them concrete, but obviously they're not just about COVID. The same issues you could talk about in almost any context. It's the same story. AI is getting smarter and smarter. It's sucking all our data to do it, and blockchain combined with AI can be configured to let all of us drive and derive benefit, but that's not the default way things are being done right now. So we could use more help in trying to advocate for the good side here.
Okay, good. To hear me, yes, for sure. You know, Ben, I think the most point of scare is about how that decentralized artificial intelligence, how that decentralized AI going to judge the people, because people can't imagine what kind of, what kind of intellect they gonna aggregate from their minds, because everything is looks like very scary for the humanity, but they are also believe that that complex intelligence maybe do something much more better to all and each one of the humanity on earth. I think yes, on this, if you are looks like on this way, maybe that singularity also come via decentralized augmented reality as well.
Yeah, I mean, we need to make sure that the first artificial general intelligence, which is really smarter than human beings in a fundamental level, is compassionate rather than indifferent or even malevolent toward human beings. And
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's not a complete science of human compassion, let alone artificial compassion. But I believe some elements of it are not hard to see, right? Like if the first AIs are all killer robots, advertising agents and spies and Wall Street traders, versus if the first AIs are doing a greater variety of things, like including education, healthcare, science, art, and social work. I mean, probably an AI involved with a larger set of applications has a greater chance of evolving into a highly compassionate super AI. Yet the majority of AI resources in the world today are going into selling, spying, killing, and gambling.
Yes.
Rather than benevolent applications. So I mean, humanity as a whole is sort of a horrible mess, right? And we don't like each other much. We conflict with each other. But if you're comparing putting the AI in the control of humanity as a whole versus putting the AI in control of a few big tech companies and intelligence agencies, we're going to have to vote for the ugly, unholy mess of humanity as a whole. And those seem to be the two alternatives at hand. I mean, I'm pretty pessimistic about a self-appointed elite who knows what's better for everybody else, sort of creating and unleashing the singularity. So creating artificial compassion is just as hard as creating artificial intelligence. I think both are doable, but indeed, we could use more focus on the compassionate side of the problem.
Okay, Ben, I'm really sorry our time is over. We are over time at this moment. Yes, it's very interesting to hear you. Very interesting. Yes, I'm also be passionate of you. My pleasure to you personally. Ben, nice to meet you here. Thanks a lot for having us. Thanks a lot for your invitation as well. Now we have to go out of the air and see you again, maybe later on another conferences.
All right, maybe face-to-face next time, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
we have met as in Malta. I think we can do it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Okay.